Good evening, my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. I would like to say thank you to everybody for coming out tonight to join in fellowship and to hear my story. I am on video as I am a very anxious noodle, and I'm not very good with public speaking, as I'm sure some of you guys have figured out by now anytime I've tried to read lessons. So here I am. I'd also like to take this time to thank Pamela for all of her help and hard work and dedication through all the Lenten services. It's been phenomenal and so beautiful every Wednesday that we got to come together. Before I get into my story, I need to add a little bit of a disclaimer. It is a very heavy story with a lot of details. I'm going to try to keep the details to a minimum of violence and certain types of assault. So if you're not okay hearing these kind of things, I would just, at your own discretion, walk away if you need to. I totally understand. So let's get into it. A lot of you have known me since I was a very little girl, running around at the original Emmanuel location. Most times refusing to go to Sunday school, and I would burst through the door of Bible studies where my mom would either be teaching or learning, and I was quite disruptive. But a lot of my earliest childhood memories actually come from that beautiful building. Whether it was doing crafts, specifically, I remember doing one craft, making like a hanging fish mobile. It's like rainbow fish, and it was so cute. I'm gonna have to bring that back for these, actually. Or I'd be watching VeggieTales, playing hide and seek with the other kids. Or I got special treatment and got to hang out in Pastor Dennis's office, play with wooden puzzles, so I wouldn't disrupt everybody doing their Bible lessons, coming through like the Tasmanian devil, just being super disruptive. At the time I started coming to Emmanuel, I started coming very young, but when I was school-aged, I was attending St. Rupert Catholic School, where I was in the school choir, and I would be singing for every celebration or liturgy, anything. I was always up on stage. I loved singing, specifically Our God is an Awesome God. That was my favorite song from a very, very young age. As some of you guys may know, I was a very sickly child. I spent a lot of my childhood in and out of the Children's Hospital. I was going through tonsillectomy surgery and getting tests done due to my epilepsy, and I was requiring around-the-clock supervision. God was always supervising, so I don't know why everybody was so worried. As years went on, I gradually got better, and my epilepsy actually went to remission until about a couple years ago. During this time, my family and I were forced to move our homes a couple of times. Our landlord was not the nicest, but because we had consistently moved, it pushed us further and further away from Emmanuel's vicinity. And then the moves tied in with my parents separating when I was still really young, made Sunday mornings at church kind of a thing of the past for me. Well, for my entire family, really. My brothers and I resided with our father full-time, and my father was always working, sometimes 2 or even 3 jobs at a time to support all of us kids. A lot of the times, my brothers and I were by ourselves. We were left to our own devices. How we never burnt our house down, I actually don't know. I think we came close. I'm pretty sure I flooded my basement at one point, but I digress. I was grateful, though, that my father had kept us in a Catholic school. Our new school, John 23rd, was a Catholic school. And I remember joining in, I believe I was in grade 2. And I got to continue learning about God, and I still got to have that center, like I had that grasp of being able to be close to the Lord at this time. I eventually joined the school choir again, praising the Lord through song daily, as I carried my memories of Emmanuel very close to my heart. I was a very happy and bubbly and outgoing little girl who loved to make friends, loved doing art, loved singing, and I loved sports. I was actually in a curling club, and I wasn't in there for very long. My best friend Nicole at the time, her father was our coach, and I was actually only in there for one season, and we went to provincials, and we took third place in provincials, which was funny to me considering I hadn't done it long. And I was very tired that morning. I remember that day very well. Aside from the curling club, I enjoyed doing basketball. I loved basketball, but my ultimate favorite was figure skating. Everything just seemed to make sense to me when my blade would hit the ice. I fell in absolute love with this beautiful sport. I eventually reached a point where my dad would actually get angry because he could not get me off the ice. At the age of 13, I finally reached grade 7. I was officially a junior high student. Being a teenager who thought they knew everything, I started to make some really bad decisions. In December of 2006, I made a decision that would ultimately alter not only my life, but the lives of my family members in some of the worst ways imaginable. After school one day, I decided to meet up with somebody who had connected with me on the internet. My 13-year-old vulnerable self didn't realize I was being lured by a 26-year-old man who ended up abducting and assaulting me for the longest 24 hours of my life. After returning to school for the first time after the incident, the other kids found out, as they always do, and I was severely bullied. I got branded for the sake of us being at church, I will say the word harlot, but that's not the word that was used. I was shoved into lockers. I had my books smacked out of my hands. Whenever I walked in the halls, I was asked if I enjoyed it. I didn't add this in my main thing I'm reading from, but I figure I will add it in here. Not only was I getting this from school, but because this case was covered so heavily by the media, I actually read comments from grown adults saying I basically asked for it. I had no escape from the shame or the ridicule anywhere I went. All of this would cause me to spiral. My father had to transfer me to a new school due to the bullying not letting up. So a few short weeks after the initial incident, I started at St. Rose of Lima Junior High School. Unfortunately, it wouldn't take long for word to spread about it at the new school, and the abuse continued for more students. The guilt, shame, and the anger that I carried with me for so long because of this decision costed me my relationship with God for a very long time. Not only just God, but everybody around me. I blamed God for everything that happened. I would constantly ask, if there was a God, how could he allow this to happen to his child? That was a question I repeatedly asked. I blamed everyone. I blamed God, myself, my parents. I was so angry that no one could even recognize who I was anymore. I know I didn't. I gave up figure skating, singing. I barely touched my art. There's very little left in life that actually brought me joy. This anger led me to make worse decisions. I started drinking underage, smoking cigarettes, smoking marijuana. No one knew where I was most of the time. And truthfully, during those times, I was usually blackout drunk or high at random people's houses or in fields outside of the city limits partying. Along with that, I would fist fight all the time with anybody who even somewhat looked at me the wrong way. I turned myself into something I had hoped would scare others just so I could be left alone. And during this, I would attempt suicide twice. I developed a horrible reputation for myself, and I didn't even care anymore. People were going to talk about me regardless, so in my mind, I thought I'd just do what everyone's saying I'm doing anyways. Then grade 8 happened. I had my very first love, who saw through the charade I was putting on. His name was James. His mother was an avid church member, and still to this day attends Prince of Faith. To gain more time to hang out with my new boyfriend, I would have to go to church with him on nights he had youth group. And so that is exactly what I did. I was highly annoyed at being back in a church, mumbling mean things about God under my breath anytime I entered the doors. But as I kept going weekly, I began to enjoy it. I met some very funny, lovable people, very quirky people, who I started to prefer the company of over my party buddies. Pastor Scott began welcoming me in every time I walked in, noting one day how I finally came in wearing a smile, opposed to my screw everything face that I usually sported. As I got to know everyone, including the youth directors and more of the adults, I was given more opportunities. I was invited on youth trips to Banff, trips to the zoo. On one of those trips to the zoo, it was during the winter, so the zoo lights were on, and we were scheduled to sing carols. For the first time in a long time, I started to sing again. But all good things eventually must come to an end, right? My relationship with my boyfriend ended, and it ended very sour, which led to me not being able to return back to that youth group. I had lost my new friends, as well as my old friends, because I elected to go to church instead of partying. I would spend the next year alone and depressed at home most of the time, engaging in a lot of self-harm. Not too long after I moved in with my mom, who managed to find her way back to Emmanuel. She asked me to come with her a few times, but I was still very angry and very resentful, so I said no. And at this time, I would say I was about 17, turning 18. I was in a very abusive and toxic relationship with the man who would come to be Serenity's biological father. During an argument one night, I managed to catch Mom getting ready to leave to start her membership courses back into Emmanuel, and I begged her to take me because I didn't want to be home alone with that man. I found myself 20 minutes later taking my own membership courses back into Emmanuel. And I started to use the church to get away from the abuse I experienced daily. In doing this, I started to find some healing, and I began to repair my relationship with the Lord. Instead of, why did you let this happen to me? I started saying, thank you for getting me out alive. I eventually ended the toxic relationship with Serenity's biological father a few months after she was born, starting to come to terms with the fact that I was worth more than I was allowing others to treat me. The crazy thing, people such as myself seem to forget quite often, is that we were gifted free will. And sometimes that free will takes us into unknown and very dangerous territory. I no longer blame God. I, however, still blamed myself, since I made the choice to go. It wasn't until about 3 years ago that I stopped blaming myself. I had seen a psychiatrist who posed the question to me, if this happened to your daughter, would it be her fault? And I said, absolutely not. It would be the adult's fault for taking advantage of someone so young and vulnerable who doesn't know any better. And then he asked me, so why are you blaming yourself? I was stunned, mortified even. Why was I taking accountability for a man who did what he did to me? That was not my burden to bear, not my cross to carry. It was his. Shortly after this revelation, I started coming to church more frequently. Armed with my newfound power and strength, I felt God directing me to the open chair of youth director on council. It was like divine intervention. I've never felt so strong about anything in my life. Not many people knew the reason why I felt so strong and passionate about becoming youth director. That reason is simple. I wanted not only to be back in a similar place that healed my inner child and gave me some sense of what my childhood was supposed to be that was taken. It saved my life as a youth, but I want to also be that beacon for other youth who are struggling. I want to create that safe space for them like it was created for me. I want to take my time now to thank everybody here at Emmanuel for being such a wonderful support for me as I healed from things I'm not even sure most of you even knew about. For loving me unconditionally and believing in me enough to have this great opportunity, for voting for me for my seat on council, and ultimately for allowing me to be there for the youth the way my youth group was for me. Thank you all so much for coming to hear my story.